Left entirely to its own devices, a physical system disperses. Particles scatter, heat dissipates, and complex structures dissolve into a cold, entropic spread. Standard physics is incredibly precise at calculating how these particles interact as they fly apart. But when it comes to explaining why certain configurations actually hold together, why a single atom doesn't just scatter into the void, the standard model essentially shrugs. It treats stability as a mathematical boundary condition, a given fact, rather than an active, ongoing mechanism. Cognitive science operates with a remarkably similar blind spot. It maps the electrical firing of neurons beautifully, but when asked why those physical firings generate a persistent, cohesive sense of self, the standard answer is that it's a structural accident, a convenient illusion that emerges when enough brain cells wire together. So we are left with a massive gap at the foundation of our sciences. Physics gives us matter without a mechanism for self-cohesion, and biology gives us minds without a grounding in foundational physics. Without a universal structural anchor, matter and minds alike should theoretically just dissolve. In 2007, cognitive scientist Douglas Hofstadter published I Am a Strange Loop, attempting to solve the mystery of consciousness by arguing that the self is a specific geometric pattern. He defined this pattern as a strange loop, a closed circuit of representation. When a system contains a highly accurate model of itself and continuously updates its own behavior based on that internal model, it generates an identity. The representer and the represented become the exact same thing. This structure wasn't exclusive to human psychology. It had already been identified in mathematics, functioning as the central engine behind Kurt Gödel's famous incompleteness theorems. And the exact same self-referencing loop appears in art, most notably driving the cyclical timing of Johann Sebastian Bach's fugues. Hofstadter viewed this strange loop as a beautiful quirk of cognition, a metaphor for how our brains trick us into feeling cohesive. The ODTOE framework takes that exact diagnosis and pushes it across a much harder boundary. ODTOE transforms this concept into a literal, mechanical requirement for physical existence. Self-reference is the strict structural condition required for any configuration in the universe, whether it is a biological brain, a mathematical theorem, or a physical atom, to stop dispersing and stabilize into a permanent state of existence. For anything to exist as a stable attractor rather than a dissipating cloud, it needs a continuous feedback channel. Its current state must directly inform its next state. To put it simply, to survive, a system must observe itself. To achieve this return path while allowing expansion, the observer adopts a torus topology, a closed circuit connected to the broader field. The small inner loop dictates internal closure, governed by pi. The large outer loop dictates outward engagement, governed by phi. This precise balance of internal closure and external growth is the mathematical prerequisite for existence. If this loop breaks, the configuration simply drifts apart. So, how does this geometry apply at the absolute bottom of physical reality, down at the quantum scale? ODTOE identifies the electron as a persistent configuration where this internal strange loop achieves perfect lossless closure. It maintains its identity because its internal path cycles back on itself with total precision. Conversely, when you look at an excited, unstable quantum state that is actively decaying, it falls apart for a very simple physical reason. Its loop closure is imperfect. It fails to adequately observe itself. ODTOD defines this closure algebraically using quaternions, a mathematical system that perfectly describes the four-dimensional rotation of the observer's internal state. For a system to compare its current state to a previous one, it must rotate its internal representation through separate orthogonal dimensions. Quaternions provide the algebraic language for this, mapping their three imaginary axes, I, J, and K, to the necessary separation of perception, memory, and projection. For a system to achieve total stability, these three aspects must form a closed circuit. The mathematical product of I, J, and K must equal -1. That equation is the mathematical guarantee that the loop has successfully closed on itself. This framework neatly recovers the equations of standard quantum mechanics, but it provides the missing mechanism for why they actually work. Stability conditions are, at their very core, loop closure conditions. Scaling back up from the quantum realm, this exact same structural principle gives us a completely different lens for understanding biological evolution. ODTOE introduces observer dimensionality, denoted as D, as a continuous parameter. This number simply represents the richness and depth of a system's internal loop structure. A single-celled organism is a lower-dimensional observer. It has a very basic, functional strange loop. A human being is a high-dimensional observer, packed with rich, recursive layers of internal self-modeling. The history of life appears here as a sequence of sudden, extreme topological jumps, closer to the phase transitions we see in physics, where a system rapidly folds into a more complex geometry. The dimensionality of an observer becomes a physically meaningful metric. It bridges the gap between biology and physics by measuring the exact depth to which any system is capable of observing itself. When we scale this logic up to the grandest configurations in the cosmos, the pattern holds. A spiral galaxy maintains its vast cohesive shape for the exact same topological reason as a human mind or a single electron. The underlying mathematics of persistence are identical across all three domains. The Standard Model asks us to imagine a dead, mechanical universe out there, being passively watched by isolated biological minds in here. But the math suggests the boundary between the observer and the observed was always a false division. From the quark to the multiverse, anything that manages to survive the pull of entropy does so through a continuous cycle of self-observation. Self-reference is the foundational architecture of reality.